Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, AI in Clinical Decision-Making and Coverage Policy, Near-Term Promise and Practical Pitfalls. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be recorded and available through our website and the RadSite YouTube channel. To minimize noise and distraction, all attendees' microphones have been muted. However, if you have a question or comment during the presentation, we encourage you to submit it using your Q&A box. We will do our best to address all questions and comments at the end. I will now turn the presentation over to our moderator, Dr. Mark Hiatt, Chief Medical Officer for RadSite. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. My name is Mark Hiatt. I'm a radiologist, as are my three panelists today. By way of a clinical background and academic background, I underwent a fellowship in cardiovascular imaging at Stanford University and have since worked in radiology in different sites across the nation. Currently, I serve as Chief Medical Officer for RadSite, which is one of this webinar's hosts. RadSite, as many of you know, is an accreditation body. It's deemed by the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, or CMS, to accredit radiology facilities. I'm joined by many luminaries in the field of radiology. They are the stars in their respective academic departments and companies, and I'd like for them to introduce themselves in turn. And we'll start with Dr. Frank Lexa.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hiatt. Thank you, Mark, very much for inviting me to be part of this distinguished panel, and I'm honored to be here speaking with Samir and Jennifer. I'm an academic neuroradiologist by training. I retired last year from full-time practice, but I continued to do that. Along the way, I had a dual career where I was also a business school professor and taught at Wharton for almost 20 years and helped them build international programs. And the other reason why I'm probably on the panel is that I've done a fair amount of work in venture capital, looking at early stage investments in this sector. And also, as you can see from my title, for 12 years, I ran the Radiology Leadership Institute for the ACR and felt some leadership roles there as well. So thank you again for inviting me to come.
Thank you, Frank. We're really excited to hear your insights today on artificial intelligence. Frank is joined by Dr. Samir Shah. Samir, tell us about yourself.
Hey, Mark, thank you so much. So I am a practicing radiologist, been so for about 22 years. I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I came here after my IR fellowship at Northwestern. Did my training at UPenn, where Frank was my attending, although he was at Wharton. And I remember in residency, I always wanted to meet him. And after I graduated and moved to Pittsburgh, like very early on, I was president of the Pitt Rankin Society. And I got to invite one person, and I just reached out blind to Frank and invited him over. So we've known each other for quite a while. And so I ended up in venture capital and private equity owned large big box corporate radiology groups for last 15 years, starting with VRAD, eventually going to Rad Partners, eventually going to Envision Healthcare in the teleradiology space. It was very, fortuitous because, my private practice went bankrupt at the time of Deficit Reduction Act. And then, the financial crisis hit and all the telerads in Australia moved back to the US. I happened to be here, so I was just, into leadership fortuitously. And in the last 5 or 6 years, I started implementing AI into those practices, which is how Cure found out about me 2 years ago. And then I joined as Chief Medical Officer, and it's been a huge learning experience for me because I don't have an informatics background per se. Learned on the job. And at the same time, it was also a learning experience for Cure because they didn't know radiology workflow, and how we work, which was really, really key in order to implementing at sites. So.
Wow, fantastic experience. And you'll have also some, I'm sure, very good insights. And so this is kind of working out to be a reunion of sorts, this webinar.
In a way, because Jen's husband is a relative of my mentor, Evan Siegelman.
Well, Dr. Jennifer Siegelman, welcome to our panel. We're so happy to have you. Jen, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I too am a radiologist, although I left clinical practice of bedside radiology about 10 years ago, where I joined a large pharmaceutical company where I was involved in the development of new AI solutions for imaging and also helping startups build products that were pertinent to doing quantitative imaging and identifying biomarkers that could be used in clinical trials. And so, before that, though, I was in private practice for about 10 years, and then I worked at a large academic institution in Boston for 3 years. So I think my background is kind of in many different, wearing many different hats, but I can tell you that I'm an early adopter and a highly enthusiastic about artificial intelligence as a helper and the future of artificial intelligence as maybe more than that.
Well, great. Well, let's talk about the roadmap for today's conversation. So we're going to talk about where AI is today in radiology, what's actually useful now, not speculation, but what we currently see. Number two, we're going to look as a reaction to that, what are the current practical risks? What's the evidence and what guardrails do we need, if any? Three, we're going to look for the future. What's going to happen, we believe, and this is where we can speculate some, but on the basis of good evidence. What will scale and what won't. And then we hope to leave some time for you, the audience, to ask us questions. So as our hostess, Andy, mentioned at the beginning, type into your respective boxes any questions that you may have, which we'll ask at the end. Are we ready? So the first of three topics is AI in radiology today. And what I'd like to know from our panelists is, in your own practice or experience, where is AI already helping day by day in a way that feels genuinely part of the workflow, genuinely useful, not something that's experimental or hypothetical, but something that's happening today?
I'm happy to go first.
Samir.
I like Jen, have been an enthusiast using it for a long time. I remember we were one of the first 5 sites at RP in Matrix teleradiology to use AI Doc, and at the time I was totally against it. I remember telling the engineer that installed it on my computer, this is a waste of your time because I don't miss PEs. And I told him I wasn't trying to be arrogant. It's just that I have a search pattern and I'm really careful.
And by PEs, you don't miss physical education?
In the pulmonary emboli.
Oh,
that was
okay.
our first
So
algorithm.
You don't miss things on the CT scan. And you
That's
don't
what
need
I was so arrogant to believe that. And I told the engineer that. I said, this is going to be a waste of your time. And within 24 hours, I had missed a PE and he told me. But I'll tell you, that was a great point in my life because it was a turning point. I became an AI enthusiast, really, really enthusiastic about AI Doc. And uh, my perspective is that I hear from radiologists, it almost the more prominent the academic institution, the less likely the radiologists are using AI. And their viewpoint is that, look, AI slows us down. They're not always wrong about that. AI doesn't really help a lot. It's not like I can't see a head bleed, I can't see a PE. They're somewhat right about that. But when you've been using it for years, I'm faster on, for example, a pulmonary embolus study. If the patient is obese, there's artifact. If the patient's breathing, there's artifact. If the bolus is, not great. And what I end up doing prior to AI is I would scroll and scroll and scroll, trying to make sure I don't miss anything.
Yep.
Now I trust that the algorithm is so good that I know that if it says there's no PE, then there isn't a PE. And I can be faster when it's negative. And then if it says there's a PE, I'm faster when it's positive.
Samir, before we get to Frank, can I give you my own nightmare with PE?
Yes, please.
In this case, my PE was pleural effusion.
Oh.
So on a lateral chest x-ray, I missed, and maybe my excuse is I was going too fast. The patient was obese. I don't remember what it was, but I missed this enormous accumulation of fluid at the bottom aspect of the x-ray. And at that time, we didn't have AI. but we had Ted. And Ted was my colleague who, on subsequent exam, retrospectively looked back at mine. And as a very good colleague and friend, he says, "Hey, Mark, I want to show you something." And so he was my AI agent of sorts who helped me with my PE problem. And it would have been so much better if I had some type of checker just as a second set of eyes like Ted to give me that feedback so I wouldn't have made that embarrassing mistake.
Yeah. Once we're out of training, we don't have a lot of feedback.
Yeah. Frank, what do you think about this whole experience with pulmonary emboli, pleural effusions, and other things?
No, I think it's great, and I'll come to that in a moment. But I just wanted to, say that one of the things on your list where AI is already helping, and I've in the last two places where I've worked, I've been fortunate to have a fair amount of active AI and working in the background. And I've spent almost my entire career working in academic centers. So one of the anxieties you have, and I had this morning, I go in to work and we have cases that have really only been looked at by residents since 6 p.m. the night before is the sort of cluster bomb that's waiting for you somewhere in the list. And certainly the prioritization and letting AI take a quick look at these things, and then that has reduced the number of times that I've come in and had to have that conversation with the ED about why we missed a rather large subdural hematoma or those sorts of things. So I think the prioritization is important, but I'm glad somebody else brought up PE because one of the things I was trained by some very, very good neuroradiologists, pretty famous people, great people. And one of the reasons they all liked neuro was that they thought, I'm not going to have to look at any of that other stuff, all that messy stuff in the gut or in the pelvis or that sort of thing. I was never trained to look for PEs on a CT. That's probably because I'm old and CTA wasn't a robust technology when I was in training. But I'm thrilled to have, basically the AI teaching me how to read for PEs. And I'm hoping that it'll help me with some of the other things that I really wasn't trained to do. And I've had to sort of teach myself along the way, like lung nodules. Lung nodules were not a big deal when I was looking at 13 images through the head on a CT scan. In one of the places where I worked, they deliberately threw sat pulses around the spine just so that you wouldn't be able to see anything around the spine, so they wouldn't have to worry about missing stuff. But as these technologies improve, I'm thrilled to have any kind of help I can get. And that I would love something that would splay out the MRAs of the brain so that I might not miss little things in M2 and M3 and beyond. And so anyway, I think that the prioritization is one of the things, to answer your question, where AI is already helping. But again, I'm thrilled with the notion of just about anything else that's not neuro. So happy to have the help.
Frank, you bring up an excellent point in the sense that not only is AI used for image quality checks, but also it may be a means of education or re-education of radiologists, of humans. Like where you could probably learn from what AI detects that you may have missed in the lungs, and that could be very helpful to you as part of your continuing education.
Yeah, no, it's as you said, this is kind of like my colleague who's working in real time who gives you an elbow and says, Frank, take another look at T2, that kind of thing. Absolutely.
Like my TED. Jen,
Exactly.
what has your experience been with how AI is already helping you?
So I think that one way that we really should think about is just dating back, since we're all over the age of 30 here, um, to the olden days when technologists used to bring the images to your office. And there would be an instantaneous triage. So the technologist would see the sick patient at the scanner and have immediate access to a radiologist to induce them to interpret the scan. And if they saw something funny, they would show you that image on the film at that moment in time. And so a lot of these triage devices and the large vessel occlusion detectors, which are both available today, are doing things that a good technologist or a first year resident would be able to do for you. And as things went remote and as the doctors became further removed from the technologists and further removed from the patients, and now actually from the scan being performed, right? Technologists being removed in remote scanning from the scan being performed, having automated tools in place which do this instantaneous thing that is quickly and easily done by human eyes. I never miss a PE when, of course, we all miss things. Is really kind of the elegance. So we're solving a problem that didn't exist 30 years ago, that exists now because we're in a remote environment, and I think allows learning to happen at the scanner as well. I'd like to see the tools that we have between the node of the scan being performed and the radiologist receiving the image actually be at the scanner itself. Those things should be actually talking to the technologist, because patient safety is the key here. The patient with the pulmonary embolism should never have been sent home. So I think that, there's a lot of areas of this where I think it's super important. In my work in the pharmaceutical industry, the AI algorithms are often used by the organizations that collect the CAT scans for the drug companies. They're called CROs, to do image quality checks. So if it's supposed to be a scan from the top of the shoulders to the bottom of the pelvis for lymphoma, or from the neck to the pelvis, there are automated tools that the CROs use that are not FDA regulated, because it's just a research environment, that can make sure that what was promised to have been scanned actually has been scanned and is submitted. And what that saves is actually a terrible mistake from happening, because a patient must be scanned in a clinical trial on the day that they're supposed to be scanned, plus or minus a little wiggle room.
Right.
If it's not detected in that moment, then that patient receives a diagnosis of they probably recurred. So it's hugely consequential to have high quality markers in the moment of the scan being done, or within a day or so of the scan being done, so you can capture that information so that we can actually understand the honest truth about whether medications work or they don't. So lots of ways.
Jen, this is wonderful. You even started going from interpretation of the scans to their performance through technologists. So you bring in the technologists. How is AI being adopted by technologists and radiologists now in the real workflow, and why is this happening? I think you kind of alluded to the fact that there may be some resource issues here. Can anyone comment about how AI is being incorporated into that workflow to include technologists and why this is happening?
So let me start with kind of one good example, and that is with embedded in the CAT scan machines or the MRI machines are AI algorithms which help the text to understand. For example, Siemens Healthineers has a nice one that helps the text to understand whether the protocol that they think they're performing with the patient in a position that they think the patient should be in is actually being done correctly. There's also a heart one, positioning the patient for a cardiac exam, that's quite elegant, because those are super hard exams to position. I'll defer to Mark. The position and the way you take the cuts is quite challenging for technologists, hard to get right. So I think that's a nice way that the techs are interfacing with AI.
You're exactly right. And one thing I found across the nation is that these texts are fewer and fewer, or maybe it's the volume's increasing more and more. I'm not sure. Samir or Frank, have you had any experience with respect to this very real concept of staffing shortages?
Oh, definitely. And Frank, I'll definitely let you weigh in as well. But like, they have also each tech has so many additional numbers of steps that they are expected to perform. One very, very cogent comment that somebody made to me when I said, why don't the techs tell us about a bleed anymore? Like they used to immediately tell us about a bleed. And my colleague said, first of all, I remember my attending told me, if the tech tells you and shows you choroid plexus or something wrong, educate them, make them very, very happy that they came to you, because if you make them happy that they came to you, then they'll come to you more and more every time there's a bleed. And you want them to do that. That was our only triage mechanism as CT volumes were increasing and increasing. And then as we, pre-COVID and then especially post-COVID, went remote, they have no incentive to tell that there's a bleed or even interact with us. because they don't know who's going to read the study. Where is that person going to be? They could be in Texas if your scanner's in Pennsylvania. So I think that it's a very, very, very good point about technologists, the shortage, the compounding responsibilities they have, and what they've given up to do their work, and they've given up that interaction with us.
So there's this conspiring of these different factors
Oh
of
yeah,
shortages, the distance between maybe the scanner and the interpretation of that produced scan, as Jen alluded to, the growing complexity of the cases. And it truly may be that AI is a means to establish that consistency across sites, whether it be in Pennsylvania or Texas. Frank, what do you think?
Well, no, I completely agree. And I've always seen radiology as a team sport, and obviously COVID and the ability to work remote can degrade that. But yeah, I had technologists at Hupp back when I was working there the first time I worked there, not the second time when Samir and I overlapped, where I knew that they were very good and that they could function at about upper resident level in terms of catching things.
Hmm.
So and they were also at that time, once you got to know them, um, you could let them basically, they knew what extra sequences to put on, and they really didn't feel have to run things past me because we trusted each other. Um, in some of the other places where I've worked, certainly most of the technologists are very interested in feedback. They would like to have the relationship, but many of them are shy. Then we have a shortage, so everybody's too busy. And then certainly in one of the places where I worked during the midst of COVID, we had a core of very loyal technologists, but half the time when I was calling them or they were calling me, these were people who I didn't know, and that degrades the relationship. And often because they're not familiar with the equipment and the sequences, they're less likely to call you than somebody who just knows that this is how this looks at 1.5, and I'm going to call Frank right away and let him know that this is going on and all that. So yeah, to the extent that we can restore that, um, even given that we are often in different geographies, that's all to the good, because we suffered a lot with flying techs who really didn't understand and slow you down. And I had one crazy thing, and it happened to one of my other colleagues the same week. When I told him the story, he said, "Of course," but I was looking at this crazy spine that was going on with sequence after sequence after sequence, and we really weren't making any progress. I call over there, and the lead technologist just said, "Dr. Alexa, I know. I'm working with them. It's a traveler, so we'll get it sorted out for you." But yeah, I mean, so I think that ability to, again, work as a team, share the data, um, work off of, again, the same AI support, I think that could make it a little more fun to work together, particularly if we really get to the point where it really saves us time. I think all of us would love to have slack in our schedule
Yeah.
because that's where you can build the relationships. I don't really feel that most of the time when I work. I feel like I come in, there's a big stack, and I've got to try to get done like I did today so that I can get onto something I have to do in the afternoon.
Mhm.
Not a lot of time to reflect, to goof around, maybe just educate each other, but that's certainly my hope with AI.
Yeah.
I just want to add one last thing. I think that having algorithms perform the quality control job, the auditor's job, um, makes for a culture that is a lot more collegial because you can always point to the auditor and say, "Oh, they found this inhomogeneity, they found this deviation." And I think that when we think about mega practices, the ability to compare performance across practices with uniform metrics of success, not to speak corporate, but that's how good engineering happens. And if we're going to be delivering a product that is good enough in every state, good enough in every practice, or even great in every practice, it should be uniform. So understanding where the distortions from uniformity, and some of those distortions I'll raise are actually superior practice, but that has to be handled kind of by the human in the loop to say, you're very different, but better, versus you're very different. Let's help you to perform at a median level. That doesn't just go for technologists or machines. That also goes for radiologists. right? So having performance metrics based on an arbiter who is not a peer reviewer who might have an axe to grind or is picayune about a particular adrenal nodule that they've worried about their whole lives. These things are arbitrary, but having big data available to make assessments of human performance actually would be a nice byproduct of an AI intervention into radiology that I don't think a lot of people have yet written about.
Good point. So these are great insights into how I think radiology is currently benefiting from the real current use of artificial intelligence. And it seems to be pretty much in the realm of image quality checks and other ways for the benefit, I think, certainly of the clinician, the practice, and certainly the patient. But I'd like to move on to another topic, which is, are you concerned about any risks related to the introduction of artificial intelligence into your practice?
Definitely. I mean, there's, I'll just say it out there. There's all these new platform companies, right? Um, Getting AI installed in a health system is a huge undertaking potentially, and health systems are very incentivized to use platform companies. But my problem and my the leadership at my AI company's problem is that if AI was a commodity, then sure, use an app store and have a platform and have that intermediary dole out AI algorithms willy-nilly. But it's not a commodity. It takes significant customer service, it takes tuning. There's problems like bias and drift that happen that you need to, you can't delegate that platform company to maintain your AI algorithms or to update them or to optimize them yet. We're not at that point. So that's one risk that I worry about, because from a health system point of view, they don't want to go through 8 months of contracting and BAA and cybersecurity with 100 different vendors. They would much rather have some company that can give you an option of 100 different algorithms and use them, et cetera. So I think that you're going to see some changes happen in AI, for sure in the next few years. There are going to be bankruptcies. There have been bankruptcies of platform companies, and there's going to be bankruptcies of AI companies, and it's gonna change the landscape for sure.
Jen or Frank?
Well, I guess a simple one, and I think it's where we are in the technology curve, is the promise that I've heard from some hospital administrators and some people who invest in the area is that, well, we're going to be able to reduce your need for radiologists by 20%. That seems to be a number that's popular. I have to say that even though I, again, had the privilege of having a fair amount of exposure to AI, I can't say that that's what's really happening. And in fact, to your question about risk, there are times where it slows me down a bit because I feel like I need to make a comment if the AI is seeing a skull fracture and I'm not, just like I would if it was another human. Um, just to both protect myself and also just make it clear to, because I think one of the customers, and I teach this to our residents, is that while we sort of see ourselves as, well, we're working for our patients, which we are, we're working for our referring, colleagues, which we are. But sometimes I put things in my report to hopefully help my brother and sister radiologists when they have to see the next study on this person. And just to make it crystal clear that I don't see a fracture. I do the same way I would if it was another human, which is I'll just say, well, there's a very prominent vascular groove in the parietal bone, which is the thing that the AI is bothered by. So it does slow me down a little bit from time to time. So it's not a huge risk and not a big deal, but certainly I don't feel like I can read 20% more studies, or I'm not getting out 20% earlier because I have good AI programs running in the background.
Good point.
And I think that's in contradistinction. So we were all about radiology AI leading the way in healthcare AI for the last 10 years or so. But as everyone, I think, on the call probably is aware of, in physicians' offices and providers' offices now, there's a tool called ambient listening, which is making notes for the primary care or the specialty doctor. And so generating a primary note or a transcript of an office appointment means that the doctor doesn't have to be writing down, slowing down, clicking boxes as they were before. And so the economics or the efficiencies gained by those doctors doing that job seems to be quite clear. And it kind of reminds me, I have a cousin who works in the financial sector, and he said that their company actually explicitly said, we expect you and your team to be 30% more efficient because you are using AI to do your job. And so, as a, once healthcare leader in a healthcare system, I think that this expectation is about to be put on doctors to
Mm.
there's gains in efficiency to see more patients potentially and not actually have any upside. So the question of whether what worries me about AI in radiology is the expectation of efficiency, but really it's another distractor. As Frank pointed out, it provides a second set of eyes, but that second set of eyes is not at your level. It's a junior set of eyes to yours if you're a practicing specialty radiologist. And so that's actually has a cost, and we haven't yet understood what the cost of an additional marginal distraction is. Because if you're worried about the little asterisk on the image or light up on the image, you actually might be distracted from the pertinent signal that's in the image. And so one thing that I'm worried about, honestly, is who's tracking the unfortunate misses that happen as a result of the AI distracting the radiologist from what their standard search pattern. It's something to think about in the design of systems and when you're evaluating systems for whether you wish to buy that system. How does it break the workflow that's already established? And there may be a period of time where it gets quite ugly before we get used to it. We had this when we switched from transcription with transcriptionists to using at the place where I trained, we actually had a key screen. We had to key in the information and then switching to voice dictation, which was great, but then macros again distracted your attention away. And so this attentiveness of the doctor, and the field is, I think, called psychophysics. So can you see in your mind actually understand what your eyes have seen? It's a super interesting area of academic interest, but I think it's a real potential problem.
Wow, Frank, I'll get to you in a second, but almost we need to track, as you say, Jen, this distraction and maybe adjust thereby that quoted 30 or 20% reduction, because it may actually be there's no gain because of the distraction. Frank, what do you think?
Well, I just want to build a little bit on one of the things that Jennifer just said, because I think it's a really critical issue for thinking about AI. And it goes again to who the customer is that when I look at AI products, and there have been some papers about some of the things that we're talking about here, about how much does it help you? Does it speed you up? Does it slow you down? And the real answer is that I think that you might want a different AI program for a sophisticated user than for an unsophisticated user. Because if it's one size fits all, then maybe the one for the residents is going to slow me down and drive me crazy. I'm going to have lights blinking at me all the time. It's going to be designed to be oversensitive and to have a lot of false positives. So again, it might be that there are different products for different people, or at least different versions of it.
Yeah, configurability.
Yeah. So it's just a thought. I realize that we're early on with the deployment, and right now, just having something that finds blood in the head is a step forward from where we were a decade or two ago. But it's just I think Jennifer's raising a really interesting point here about who really uses this, who benefits, and who would look at this and say, this is just going to drive me crazy. And it's like some of the early heads-up displays that the fighter pilots had to deal with, where they said, we're just going to turn these things off because we're not looking out the window anymore, and it's too distracting. There are too many alarms going off. There are too many lights flashing, and there has to be a way to make the user interface work better and to also perhaps make it more individualized.
And Frank,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, let's just be frank. it helped Luke in turning off his technical support as he relied on the Force.
Exactly.
So Samir, is this a nightmare to a company like Cure or other companies to have different products for different audiences? Doesn't that represent a regulatory nightmare in terms of having to get it approved for different audiences?
Not necessarily, and I'll tell you why. I will say that the claims that many of AI companies, my competitors, et cetera, that we're going to make radiologists 45% more efficient, 85% more efficient. I laugh because, first of all, as Frank and Jen have alluded to, we are very efficient right now. It is, you know, if, for example, if a algorithm is putting a bounding box on a lung nodule, and if that makes an error and the radiologist is expected to edit that bounding box, I can tell you that each of us would take that AI product and throw it in the trash because we don't have time to redraw bounding boxes. We don't have time to do much of anything. In fact, I still read clinically in a busy emergency setting. I am always debating, is this important enough to call the physician? And oftentimes I'm so busy that I've made some sacrifices and said, no, they'll see the report, hopefully. I'm hoping AI, when it's good enough, can give me some time back so that I can communicate better. We also do have a large language tracking module for lung nodules. We're really like end to end for lung cancer product at Cure. And the goal of our LLM based product to replace NLP products is to give nurse navigators more time to communicate with their patients rather than filling in data entry type stuff. So become data verifiers rather than data entry. That's communication is what we need more of in medicine. And then to your original question, I'll give you an example. It's the same AI algorithm for lung nodules on CT that we produce, but by making configurable changes, you can have an academic cardiothoracic radiologist where they have an osteosarcoma clinic, so they can't exclude calcified nodules. So, or they have really, really high requirements, whereas in Jen's field, it's not like you're reporting 2 nodules or 2 index lesions. You have to report all the lesions. So we don't eliminate, some nodules for very, very highly academic practices. In a private practice setting, we configure it so, hey, we want you to mention the top 3 nodules, exclude every granuloma that there is, because you don't have calcium engulfing squamous cell carcinomas in the community as much. So you can configure the same algorithm to be really good for 2 different types of radiologists. But I think the key is that like Cure wouldn't know how to do these things if they didn't have a radiologist as part of the company. Radiology is really, 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 really hard. So not having radiologists understanding the workflow, because our workflow is super complex, is key. And I've seen companies make all sorts of mistakes because they don't understand what we do.
Jim, before I get to you, Samir, you touched on a point about having a radiologist involved, and I want to conclude this 2 or 3 sessions with some elaboration on what we need in terms of evidence or accreditation or evaluation to be confident in adopting new AI-based technologies.
I mean, accreditation, if you look at it as Jen, I think Jen said the word standardization.
Okay.
And quality. That's a huge part. It does not end with FDA. You can look at the FDA and say, wow, they're really antiquated compared to other countries where, Cure has 50, 60 algorithms for the chest, X-ray. Here we have 6 algorithms cleared, and that's more than any other company for X-ray. That's not enough. We need like 100 because we look at 100 things on an X-ray like this.
Samir, do you need something other than the FDA? Need there to be other organizations to emerge into this arena?
Yes, you need AI expertise. You need accreditation and quality, because because implementing AI, we don't have time. We're so busy clinically that we don't have time to do probably all the correct steps, all the discordance processes, the back workflow that I've learned about now that I'm a CMO of an AI company that is needed to do it right. A lot of times we just put them into practice and rely on anecdote. Is it working? Is it not working? Who's doing the testing? Who's checking for bias and drift and all those things? Who knows?
Great.
That's my 2 cents on it.
Great. And before we move on, Jen or Frank, anything you wanted to add on this topic?
So when we think about trusting an AI algorithm to do a task, I think we have to think about what task did we ask it to do? In other words, the Food and Drug Administration allows companies to make label claims, and when a company talks to a doctor in practice or an administrator in practice, they're only allowed to say the things that the Food and Drug Administration has approved that tool to do. Um, and so then the question of is the company, the startup, required to do what's called post-market surveillance
Mm.
of their product to make sure in the real world it's functioning as designed? That's like a requirement that the Food and Drug Administration has for companies in general, all kinds of companies, including drug companies, including device companies, including algorithm companies. And so when we think about that, when a mistake is found and our scanners are updated all the time, right? We have these scanner updates that fix broken problems that are completely occult to us as radiologists. We got a new update. Well, what did it do? Well, it changed the bone suppression, hardware suppression algorithm, or changed something. You don't even know what's being changed on your machine. But in computer science, that's not allowed. So
Mm.
you and your friends in the IT department in your hospital, the reason why they're so detail oriented about documentation is because there's actually a requirement that if an algorithm, an AI algorithm, is going to be modified, tweaked, tightened, made better, um, the the company has to tell the FDA how they're going to follow that change over time, how they're going to make the changes, and how they're going to document those changes. So there's a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy around this back end. And so I think that when we're talking about a standard for validation, what is the best way to validate an algorithm? Well, I think that there's kind of two things to think about. Does the algorithm meet a standard? So creating a standard, does it meet the standard? And then the validation with a lowercase v means does it meet the standard in a controlled environment? But with a
Mhm.
capital V, and this is my way of thinking about it, is in the real world. And I think that in generating the validation evidence, and sorry to be so long-winded here, but in generating the validation evidence, we really have to think about, what is the ultimate validation? Well, it's that you're paid for producing this service, and you're paid because you've documented that it actually brings value to not to the radiologist, not to the healthcare administrator, but to the patient. So
Mhm.
that's kind of the interesting part of it all for me. I mean, it's a long chain of events, and this is a really interesting webinar for me because I hadn't really put those pieces together until we thought about it here.
Yeah, excellent insight, Jen. And I think that is so that's so needed in terms of establishing trust in a very reluctant population with respect to artificial intelligence. And we've all seen the science fiction movies, right? But we really need to have trust that the algorithm won't control us, but we'll control it, and it'll do it as we intend it to do. So, speaking of science pictures and futuristic movies, let's go on to our final of three topics, which is in regard to the future. And I'd like to know from this distinguished panel, you all have your fingers in different projects, and you probably are some of the best prognosticators of what the future will bring. But let's limit it to the next 2 to 5 years. Looking at these few years ahead, what kinds of AI tools do you think will truly stick in community radiology settings in the real world?
I'm a big fan of AI. I think it's already starting to be commoditized. AI report generation. That is something I've seen that actually saves a little bit of time. like I said, I'm very skeptical whenever somebody says they're going to save time for me, but these AI report generators seem to be doing a good job of it. Even if they're just doing the impression for me, it
So,
helps.
so there for the audiences, does that mean for those who may not produce reports, does that kind of like mean having, having, I used to be a resident who would
Yeah.
create the report for my attending radiologist, who then would read over it and quickly approve it. And I kind of made things more efficient for him or her. Would AI then be like the replacement of that resident?
Yes, and actually the very earliest ones, kind of just like an attending and a resident, the AI report generator would make this horrible report and I would erase it all and redictate it because it wasn't helpful. But the newest ones, this is what it'll do for me. It'll let me dictate just pertinent positive findings. I
Okay.
don't have to dictate anything negative, and I can dictate in any order. I can do the lung bases first, or I can do the lung bases last. Doesn't matter. It'll put everything into a nice subheaded report, a structured report. It'll do the impressions, and it'll give me the evidence-based recommendations. Because there are way too many guidelines and recommendations for any human to remember. So, for a 3.9 centimeter AAA, what's the right recommendation? For a 1.5 centimeter thyroid nodule, you know, that kind of thing.
For the benefit of your referring physician to give him or her, based upon the size of the pulmonary nodule, what the Fleshner criteria are,
Yes,
so that you
exactly.
don't get the repeat follow-up exam too soon or too late.
Or you don't have a radiologist do what annoys our referring docs and just paste all the guidelines at the bottom of the report.
Yeah. Jen and Frank, are there other tools that you see sticking in the next 2 to 5 years? Frank.
I'd start off by saying I really would like to have something that makes the dictation piece a little bit less onerous, because I think I really want to spend most of my time looking at the images. To some extent, this sounds like back to the past, because this is how my attendings dictated. Said, Frank, tell him that the brain tumor is bigger. Not going into a lot of detail, but just barking out several key findings, and then I get to do the penmanship and figure it all out. So I do like that. I think one of the things to build on that is not just something that gets to be very clever, gets to know my style, and puts things together in good prose as I'm sort of going through it, but also something that does what I think a good fellow would do with me, and sure he would know that I'm going to ask, when I see something like a mass in the brain, I'm going to ask them, well, does the patient have a known cancer? Because we're not getting that from our referring docs anymore. We're getting headache or rule out anything kinds of, which isn't helpful. So a good fellow quickly learns that if I ask them, 3 or 4 times in the same week, does this person have a normal immune system? Are they HIV positive? Because that's going to affect what we're going to say about the stuff in the brain. Then they quickly learn to do that. So when I sit down, they already know that, and that saves that. So I think the ability to reach into other systems, particularly the EMR, is going to be helpful. And then I can fantasize that maybe for things that get to be, kind of boring after a while, like looking at the last 3 MS cases and just making sure that there aren't any new lesions, and to go back and forth to do a better job of doing comparisons. And even something like a GBM, glioblastoma multiforme, a high-level brain tumor, in the end, you're breaking it down into really just 4 or 5 sub-elements to make the decision if it's better, worse, or the same. And to the extent that I can sort of maybe break that down or have a system that breaks it down, that would be helpful. It would also be helpful if somebody has 20 Mets and we've irradiated 10 of them. And again, that's a long case. It takes about 20 minutes to do that properly. And it would be nice to have automated systems that are at least good at doing the comparisons. But again, we need to have the human oversight. But again, I would be thrilled if it can at least go into the EMR and function at the level of a good fellow. I mean, I'm still going to look at every image. I'm still going to cross-check to make sure that the one in the temporal lobe is stable. But it's just nice if most of that is set up and done when I sit down to look at the first 2,000 images.
Two excellent cases. Jen, do you have anything to add that either that will stick or something that will fizzle in the next 2 to 5 years?
I'm going to be a bit more optimistic.
Okay.
I think that both of the things that they're asking for will stick, and I could totally concur that they're necessary, important, and will expedite. But could we have predicted 3 years ago we'd be where we are with large language models today? I mean, there's no way that we could have predicted how useful these GPTs would be in daily life, in applying for a job, in making travel plans, in understanding the nature of the universe. And I think that the information which came out just recently in the last few days from Claude AI, a company, which makes a promise to eat up your whole epic chart, plus any other charts you may have, and distill out things that your doctor might have missed or your nurse practitioner might have missed, I think, or your PA might have missed, your provider might have missed, is incredibly, incredibly exciting. And I think that we know from recent meetings that have happened around the world that vision language foundation models, where we're training a computer to go from images to diagnosis in a way that's different than the old way. So I said in the beginning, I developed several machine learning, artificial intelligence algorithms where I thought as a person, I'm going to teach the tool to do a thing just like me. Now we're giving them the totality of the data. So just like the NASA scientists do with space data, or the submarine scientists do with marine data, the same sort of data scientists, it's really being unlocked. And so I'm optimistic that in 5 years, we're going to see an entirely different practice where there is, dare I say, autonomous, meaning human out of the loop tasks that are done. And it might be simple things like reading the backlog of DEXA scans or taking technologists' preliminary reads and only flagging the cases where there's some uncertainty, whether the blood vessel is compressible or not. I think that these tasks can be done by algorithms and machines, and I think that we will have a little bit of a reduction for the need of the highly, highly skilled workers who are asked to do tasks which are honestly tasks that don't require that level of expertise. And so maybe, go ahead.
Is this being optimistic, or is this actually saying what radiologists are afraid to admit? Like, again, like you said a few days ago with Claude for healthcare, but like I think everyone has noticed kind of the rapid climb in use of ChatGPT like models to answer what we used to search in Google for.
For days, for weeks. Things that took you weeks take you minutes.
Yes,
and so
creating itineraries for travel, etc. It's instant.
Or checking the references on somebody's research paper. I mean, it's deep.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
So I think I'm not afraid, and I don't think you should be afraid, because I think that we are, and I defer to Frank with the MBA. I'm hoping he'll jump in, and Mark with the MBA, right? So, there's elasticity of demand, and it's not clear to me, this is kind of geeky economics, but it's not clear to me that the appetite for consuming imaging or consuming healthcare is actually limited. I think that there's an infinite appetite. People would consume as much healthcare as you made available to them. Now, that might just be, me, a country doc, thinking a thing, but I think that there's always going to be room for as many radiologists as we can train, because we do things that are harder.
Right. The three of you paint a picture of the future that's transformed. As a concluding question, I want to know from each of you how you think that our audience, mainly consisting of different radiology practices, what they should do now, what decisions they should make to prepare for this transformed future involving AI in ways that we may not even be able to fathom.
From my end, I would say you start using some AI now, because I've been using it for almost 7-8 years, some form or another, like when the stroke program started, and then, PE programs, et cetera. It's made me a better radiologist, as Frank alluded to. and we're really an X-ray algorithm company. We started doing autonomous TB outside the US because there are no radiologists outside the US. They don't have tons of CAT scans out there. And, I would say that young radiologists, right out of training, they didn't have, I had 10 months of ICU chest X-ray rotations, right?
Yeah.
They don't have that. They are not good at reading plain film. They are not comfortable reading plain film. And, probably all of us on this panel had attendings who could tell you what the patient ate for breakfast on
Yes.
the X-ray. So I think that, we don't have time to find that lung nodule, spend extra 15, 20 seconds to look for a lung nodule. All of these things are going to transform practice. And so start using AI now. Get some AI models in your workflow.
Great. Frank?
Yeah, I would just build on that I think that, part of this is just taking the mystery away. I think that there are a lot of misconceptions. Use it, figure out how to use it effectively, and also if you're at an academic place like I am, make sure that it's not detracting from the relationship with the trainees, because there are other pressures that are hurting our relationships with them. And the last thing we want to do is have AI be another problem, but instead just use it as a plus. But I would just get started with it. And then to say a little bit about what Jen was talking about, just understanding and thinking hard about how to make us the customers for this. Because I want AI that's going to make my life better. There's going to be a shortage of radiologists for the rest of, for the next 30 years. There was a paper in the ACR talking, and they came up with 2050 that somehow magically we're going to not have a shortage then. But in the meantime, we will. And as was alluded to earlier, it's a global problem.
Yep.
Very few countries are fat on radiologists. Most of us are very, very lean. So the chance to do better is one of the things that I think is going to drive the economics of AI and allow us to focus on things where we're adding the most value. Because I think I could, train a 4-year-old how to measure whether or not a brain tumor is bigger or smaller. So that's really not that 20 seconds of me playing with the ruler on the screen isn't really the best use of my time. And doing that for 12 cases, it's just everything adds up. So to the extent that it's also taking away the mental energy, because I'm not doing stupid things. I'm doing things that are more important, hopefully.
Definitely. Jen, concluding advice.
As a community practice leader, I think the first thing I would think about is AI literacy for your staff. So this is what we've been talking about here. Afford them the opportunity to learn about AI as applied to radiology. So make it part of your monthly quality and safety meeting, where you bring up the AI tools and how they're working. Because once that comfort level of technologists is brought up, of the front office is brought up, then more and more, it'll be synergistic.
Fantastic. Well, I'd just like to thank my panelists, just superb insights. Andy, do you have any concluding questions or comments that you would like to share as we conclude this webinar?
It looks like we're right about at our time. So RadSite would like to thank our moderator, Dr. Mark Hiatt, and our panelists, Dr. Frank Lexa, Dr. Samir Shah, and Dr. Jennifer Siegelman. Just a reminder that today's webinar has been recorded. Please visit our webinar page on RadSite's website at www.radsitequality.com or our YouTube channel for this webinar recording and past webinar recordings. If you'd like to learn more information about RadSite's accreditation programs, contact us at info@radsitequality.com. Thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again at future webinars.
Thank you.
Thank you.